from the 1870s onwards, there were two interesting forces that coalesced. On the one hand, some economists, political economists at the time, tried to become established as academics in universities. And the way they tried to do that was by mimicking physics, to pretend that they were the physicists of society, the scientists of society. And to do that, they tore up the whole political economics tradition of Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Karl Marx, and tried to reconstitute economics on the basis of some kind of analytic synthetic method, where the individual was to the economist that which the atom was to the physicist. So it became an atomistic, individualistic. But the moment you try to mathematize on the basis of atomism, of individualism, you end up with mathematical models of market exchanges which lose any sight they might have had of the social relations of production. And the fact that once you enter into the labor contract at the basis of the corporation, of the firm, the business, you exit the market and you have a social relationship with your boss. And therefore, from the 1870s onwards, what we call neoclassical economics, marginalist economics, became utterly disconnected from really existing capitalism. That was one force. The other force was that at that time, of course, with the second industrial revolution, capitalism, the powers that be, the ruling classes, were desperate for a legitimizing political economy, one that presented them as cogs in a natural science experiment. So that naturalistic, mathematical, neoclassical economics suited them down to the ground, because in it there was no room for exploitation in these models. There was no room for social relations, and they allowed the economists to create mathematical models which were in a perfect ideological cover that allowed them to present themselves as parts of a natural system of efficiently allocating resources. So once we got into that framework of thinking about the economy, capitalism became invisible. And therefore any analysis of capitalism became irrelevant. But more generally than that, it took me decades to come to this conclusion. It's not something that I always knew. Any attempt to create mathematical models of capitalism, whether they are founded on premises like the ones I mentioned, or Marxist assumptions, end up spectacular failures. Because capitalism cannot, just like Darwinism, cannot really be encased in a well-defined, determinate mathematical model. And any attempt to do it will only succeed if it distances the model from capitalism. And this is a fate that unfortunately has befallen even Marxist economists who became scholastic and consumed by their own models. It can't do that. All GDP can tell us is whether capitalist activity is going up or down. Now, when GDP is falling by 5, 6, 7% every year, as it is in Greece at the moment, you know there's something wrong with Greek capitalism, right? So in that sense, it's useful. But on the other hand, it has no capacity to relate to us and to capture the quality of human life and of the human condition. So, you know, the standard example, a forest breaks down, GDP goes up. There is a tsunami in Japan, GDP goes up very quickly because of all the effort to save people, which costs diesel fuel, and all the effort at reconstruction, putting up tents and so on and so forth. So if let's say you're an extraterrestrial on Mars or some other universe, and you are only watching the GDP time series, you'll have a very distorted view of the human experience. One of the great evils of our time is this penchant for quantification of unquantifiable variables. If you look, it started in Britain, in the National Health Service and the universities, and then spread in different realms in different countries. The attempt to quantify, for instance, the quality of academic research, or the care given to patients in hospitals. There is a logic in doing it, in the sense that we want hospitals and universities to be accountable to the people, so that we know how well they're doing. But when you try to quantify the quality of the goods that they are producing, then what you're doing is, because this quantification will always be false, will always fail to capture quality. Because how do you measure beauty? How do you measure love? How do you measure care? How do you measure the quality of a poem, or of an essay, or for that matter, a philosophical text? Because this is what you're doing when you quantify the performance of philosophers in universities. The answer is you can't. So any attempt to do it will leave out a lot of important stuff, which cannot be quantified. And that creates awful incentives for people who get rewarded on the basis of the quantities that are reported on their behalf, to do all the things that increase their indices, which are sometimes, actually more often than not, detrimental to all the good stuff that cannot be measured. So we should be aware of the need to quantify. That's why we need some descriptive data, descriptive statistics that will give us a sense of how society is served by different policies. But we have to make sure that these are multiple quantities, not one statistics, not the alternative to GDP, gross happiness index, as in Bhutan and so on. There should be a series of statistics, and we look at all of them. So, for instance, life expectancy, how happy kids are when they come back home from school, the consumption of books, how many people read books, how many people attend concerts in order to gain a sense of cultural life, how well are our museums doing. These are, so I would favor a menu of different quantities which give us a whiff of the qualities. Judgment. You see, I am a science freak. I love science. Science is the greatest instrument we have against superstition and stupidity. But the problem is that we have pseudoscience. Economics is a pseudoscience. Any attempt to measure beauty scientifically is not scientific. It's rubbish. So I just don't like rubbish science. And when science is used in order to pursue particular political agendas by supposedly creating scientific measurements of things that cannot be measured, this is an affront to science. Well, I think that what is of the essence is to decouple and to make the very sharp distinction between growth and development. Growth, I don't care for, but development I do. So there are lots of things that I want to see go into recession, not in growth. I want to see the financial sector be in recession, that is to shrink. I want to see CO2 production not grow. I want to see lots of poisonous activities diminish, not grow. But development is a humanist concept, because development doesn't mean necessarily bigger, it means better. It means, for me, development is to have an educational system which is very unproductive, to have one teacher for one pupil, if we can. I mean, the bourgeoisie wants that. They send their kids to Oxford and Cambridge because they have one-to-one tutorials. Why shouldn't the rest of us want the same thing? Perhaps one-to-one is overstated, but 1-to-5 is not. So an economy which can sustain one teacher for 5 pupils, right, is a developing economy, is a developmentalist economy, but it's not one that necessarily is into capitalist growth. Growth is a miasma on this planet. Look at the way that suburbs have grown, contributing massively to GDP growth. It is catastrophic. You've got the expansion of the cities at a horizontal level, far and deeply into the countryside, which means that you have to create very long distribution networks, both for people and for goods and services, which is very inefficient. At the same time, you create isolated communities that create a lot of middle class